Good luck, everyone. Let's hope this is the start of something pretty good, pretty exciting. To keep it tight and keep it bright.
Like your teeth, Rich.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rishi Persad, and welcome to Racing Weekly, a YouTube and podcast show that takes a 360-degree view of the sport we all love. Each week, we'll be reviewing the racing that's just gone and looking ahead to the racing coming up, talking about the big stories in the sport, and maybe, just maybe, finding a winner or two for you along the way as we mark your card in the build-up to the Cheltenham Festival. Alongside me each and every week is my pal, racing TV pundit, and five-time tipster of the year, Sam Turner. Sam, how are you? How was your weekend?
Yeah, good form. Thanks, Rishi. Yeah, a bit of a sport billy all weekend because there's some good football. Wolves managed to win down at Brentford. That was a result. Obviously, the cricket went okay. I think we're playing too much Test cricket, though, our T20 side, because we're trying to bat like the Test team in that first T20 international. Thankfully, the second one was a bit better and the racing was brilliant, wasn't it? So, yeah, fabulous weekend, plenty of ticks in boxes.
Obviously, you're appreciating the fact that United softened up Brentford for everyone, for you guys on the weekend. In fairness, when it comes to the racing, there is only one place to start, Sam. Everyone, I imagine, still feeling the feel-good factor of what we saw in the Clarence House Chase. Shishkin wearing down Energumene late on. What did you make of it all?
I thought it was a fabulous race, obviously, like the great majority of the racing public. I think some of the platitudes are a little bit overdone, if I'm brutally honest. I think people have been... I think if you were Ascot, it was a different case. I think you get swept up in the occasion, the emotion of it, seeing Shishkin obviously pick up strongly after the last must have been a great thriller, certainly if you've had a few bob on as well. And even if you haven't, it was a great race. Some quite diverse tactics from both horses, the way that they're ridden, totally different run styles. So I thought it was a brilliant horse race. I do think there's been some brilliant horse races in the last decade. I mean, I've seen it labelled as the best race of the decade, and I'm absolutely staggered. There's real recency bias in play here. I must just use the disclaimer. I am over 50 and I'm a curmudgeon, so I'm not looking to dampen it totally. It was a brilliant horse race and really welcome to see the two of them going head to head and right at it. It was a good race for betting turnover as well, because you're either in the Energemene or the Shishkin camp, with all respect to Amula Gold and First Flow. So that generated a lot of interest as well. As I say, those who are on track must have enjoyed a brilliant atmosphere and put the roar up on a Saturday afternoon, a cold Saturday afternoon in January. So they were all great things. But I mean, I can just recount a number of great races I've seen, even in the last couple of years at Cheltenham festivals and Aintree, et cetera, that I think personally we're on a par with that. But that shouldn't be used to beat the race with that particular stick, because it was great seeing two massively good quality horses going head to head and doing battle, pre one of the spring festivals. And, that was a refreshing change, as we both know. And
hopefully the fact that both horses come out of the race with a great deal of credit will mean that people might be encouraged, connections of good horses might be encouraged to understand that perhaps defeat doesn't dent any prospects for the future. It might enhance it. So with that in mind, the likelihood is we'll see them both again in the Queen Mother Champion Chase at the festival. Who will come out on top? Because I've had a lot of people making a strong case for Energumene overturning the form with Shishkin, nature of the track, slightly quicker ground, etc. What do you think?
Yeah, I find that interesting, because I thought Shishkin did plenty wrong on Saturday and still managed to win a cosy length going away at the line. And you would think that Cheltenham would be absolutely no problem at all for him, given that he's already been quite an explosive performer at that track. Energemene, maybe he can be got a little bit better than he was as well, but I thought he had the clean run of the race. He jumped beautifully in the main. I thought Shishkin was a little bit slovenly over a couple, edged out to his left a little bit, and did a fair few things wrong. I think that would be the scary thing for me if I was Energemene, and one of his connections is that things went pretty much perfectly at Ascot on Saturday for him, whereas for Shishkin, he had to overcome one or two issues, most of which were made by his own making, but he had to overcome those and still won a cosy length. And it just could be that Shishkin's just simply a better horse. That's certainly the way that it looked on Saturday. Obviously, you can't afford to miss a beat at Cheltenham, and in a four-runner race at Ascot, you've got less traffic problems. You've probably got less one or two less issues that way, but I still think that that Shishkin is very much the one to beat, and I think he can be better than he was on Saturday.
I'll tell you the thing I'm taking out of it, Sam, and I agree with you. I think Shishkin did a lot wrong, or things didn't quite go his way, and I think he'll come out on top again. But I think that there's a fine line between running these big horses in a race and, as a member of the public, as a viewer, thinking, well, we're going to find out more about these horses. There's that line where when we do find out a bit more, we'll be disappointed because we'll know quite how good each one is. But there's also the possibility of that fine line that will be the other side of the line and go, hang on a second, I want more of this. And it's addictive. And I thought, yeah, the race on Saturday lived up to the latter. They delivered, and it's now addictive. Now you've had a bite of the cherry and you want another one because it was such an enjoyable race. And hopefully that's what a few more people might take out of it in the racing game.
Yeah, let's hope so. You can't put pressure on trainers, owners, etc., to run their horses in the races that we want to run them. I understand that, but hopefully there is a little bit of a shift that we can start to recognise. I think I wrote in my column on Saturday, these are prestigious Grade 1s in their own right. Now, Cheltenham have got a host of prestigious Grade 1s, but so have Ascot, so have Newbridge, various other tracks stage these races as well. They need to be supported. Fair play to Willie Mullins. If he hadn't come over, it would have been a bit of a one-horse show and a disappointing one at that. And fair play to Nicky Henderson. He went to the well again quite quickly after Kempton. Perhaps in past years, there might have been the temptation to leave the horse off for a couple more weeks and perhaps look to Newbury instead. But no, he went for the Clarence House. He recognised that it is very prestigious Grade 1 with a great roll call of past winners. Obviously, Willie's got a good history in the race as well with Undersow, etc. So it turned out to be a great matchup, a great meeting of styles, and a good meeting of minds as well, with Mullins and Henderson doing battle. It was perfect, really, and it really did illuminate quite a dull January afternoon.
It did, and we leave Ascot in the rearview mirror, hoping that we get more of the same. I'm going to move on, talk about another Nicky Henderson horse, one that has also attracted a lot of conversation. That's Jonbon.
Now Coleman shakes up Jonbon, asks him to stretch. What could he find? Might Eye's running unwillingly between them. Here's the last. Richmond Lake joined by Jonbon, and Might Eye threading the eye of the needle, and now the long Haydock run in. Jonbon has gone to the front, but he's leaning left. He went into the path of Might Eye, who was forced to check. Jonbon is now opening up. Might Eye trying to regather the momentum, but he's surely fighting it out for a place with Richmond Lake, who's staying on, and with 100 yards to cover, Jonbon is drawing clear.
Went to Haydock, won yet again, but he didn't please everyone. And in fact, a couple of bookmakers actually eased him in the market for the Sky Bet Supreme. Where do you stand?
I respected the performance because I don't think you ever have an easy race at Haydock in the middle of winter, do you? It's a tough place to go. It's like, Rotherham on a wet Tuesday night, you've got to go and dig out a result. And he did that. He showed good battling qualities, good attitude, good temperament. He settled a bit better. His hurdling was pretty polished, as it has been in his previous starts. So I think he's starting to look a little bit more of the all-round package. His time from 3 out to the line was very, very similar to Tommy's Oscar. So that was a good performance in its own right, I think. Although the overall time was significantly slower. And his speed rating, the ones that myself and a colleague calculate, just leaves him still with a fair bit to find with those at the head of the market, Constitution Hill, obviously Dissect Dynamo, and even Sir Gerhard. That was more of what we need from Jonbon, but he's still got a good few spots to make up on that level of form to then go and trouble the likes of Dissect Dynamo, who, achieved a par figure of in excess of what Appreciate It managed to achieve last year going into the Supreme. So he's going to need to find further improvement for me, but that's not to say that he couldn't do it. It's not to say that, the track at Haydock might not play to his strengths. The ground may not have fully played to his strength. On a bit of spring ground for a horse that travels quite exuberantly and ebulliently, he could be a much better horse. But at least it was a step in the right direction, and it showed us that he's got that will to win, and that the fact that he wanted to knuckle down and really do it on a pretty, desperate afternoon at Haydock, where it took a bit to get through that ground.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was another step forward in the overall progression of Jonbon. And let's not forget, he's still a young horse, still relatively inexperienced. Hopefully, well, he's with the right trainer and getting a little bit more improvement each and every start. So good future still ahead of Jonbon. There'll be more discussion about the Supreme and who fancies what in the next few weeks, no doubt. Next, we're going to go to Ireland and talk about Allaho, who was very impressive in his victory at Thurles on the weekend. Before we do talk about Allaho, though, let's just remind ourselves about what Sam said in last week's show. What will be the best performance of the weekend to come?
Good question. I will go with Allaho in the 3:15 at Thurles on Sunday. He's a beast,
Nice.
isn't he?
I think so, yes. Not Hitman running away with the Clarence House. I didn't hear that.
As they run up towards the finish, will win the horse and jockey hotel chase for the second year running. Allaho wins in very good fashion.
So, Sam, how pleased were you with what Allaho did?
Yeah, I don't think I should get any kudos for putting up a 4-11 winner, but yeah, he was pretty explosive again, wasn't he, Rishi? I mean, he obviously winning the same race as he won last year en route to the Ryanair. The time figure was a little bit lower than last year's, but he beat Fakir Dudari by 12 lengths again. They must be pretty sick of seeing the back end of Allaho, as I think plenty of horses are, to be honest. He's just a little bit like Shishkin, really. He just finishes his races off so strongly. Dropping to that trip has obviously been the key to him as well. He's been damn near unbeatable over sort of 2-4, 2-5. I think he got beat once at Punchestown on his comeback up in the fog. But other than that, he's been exemplary over that sort of trip where he can use his explosive speed and his stamina at that trip to destroy his rivals. I mean, that Ryanair performance lives long in the memory. The fact there were toiling rivals at the top of the hill, really good horses that were just left in the backwash behind. And it was pretty much the same over the weekend as well. He jumped a little bit better perhaps than he did first time out. Warmed to his task a little bit after a couple of early blemishes. But other than that, he was spot on and all systems go for the Ryanair. He's going to be a tough one to beat.
I can't see an alternative. I can't see a realistic alternative to Allaho in the Ryanair. Can you?
No, because if you try and keep tabs with him over the first mile, you just punch drunk. So he just goes at a superior gallop to anything else at the moment. And, he's going to be a very, very different horse to beat. I think he's obviously taken his racing quite well. He's got a nice break now to go into the Cheltenham Festival. Provided he comes out of Sunday's race in good order, then I think he'd be one of the bankers of the meeting for me.
One of the best stories of the weekend, Sam, was the emergence or the further emergence of Tommy's Oscar as a potential each-way candidate for the champion hurdle. Now, a few people have been a bit dismissive about the quality of Tommy's Oscar's opponents and whether or not he is a realistic champion hurdle horse. But he continues to improve. He continues to go up the grades. And it's a fabulous story for the Hamiltons and their single-figure team of horses.
Yeah, it's what racing needs, really. I mean, a contender from the north as well. I mean, okay, he's a 25-33 to 1 chance at the moment, so you wouldn't say that he's a serious contender, and I shouldn't think that Honeysuckle's connections are perhaps losing any sleep, but, let's not denigrate the horse. I mean, that was a really smooth performance at Haydock. He was one of the few horses on the card that looked to have that race won at any point of that race, and the way that he travelled through it and put the race to bed was really impressive and synonymous with some of his previous performances as well. There is a school of thought that he might be better on a flat track, but he's won at Kelso, he's won at Sedgefield. He's improving quite rapidly. A 5-length defeat of Global Citizen and Hunter's Call, the 12-year-old back in third, doesn't scream, future champion hurdle winner. But just the style and panache of those performances and the way that he swings through the races. You look down the list of the champion hurdle aspirants other than Honeysuckle, your Chargers, perhaps Appreciate It, even Epatton. But you get to the bigger prices, there aren't many that are going forwardly mobile, are thrusting forward and improving like he is. And it was a lovely race for him, lovely race for Danny McMenamin to win such a nice prize, and for Connections, obviously, and the trainer, who do an exceptional job with their small team of horses. So I think he's an exciting prospect. I think he'll be a lovely, fabulous chaser. Let's hope, God willing, that he sort of gets that far and we can see how good he is over the larger obstacles as well. But he doesn't lack pace. He travels very well in a race. He looks decent ground. there's a lot of positives for Tommy's Oscar, and they're much worse 33-1 anti-post bets, I think, for Cheltenham than him.
I love the fact that immediately after the race, the Hamiltons were, we're going to give it a go. Why not? That's the sort of attitude that I enjoy, the competition in the sport. Now, one of the big stories of the weekend as well, Sam, was the first ever edition of the Lingfield Winter Million. Do you believe, particularly with a National Hunt hat on, that it was a success?
Define success. I think...
Good question.
I've still got my reservations over the venue. I think they got very lucky with the weather. I thought the clerk of the course and his team of staff did exceptionally well to produce goodish. Well, obviously it was heavy ground, but good ground for January Lingfield in the middle of January. You're not going to get much better than that, I don't think. So I have got my reservations going forward about whether it's a long-term venue for that project. I don't think we should knock anything that brings a lot of money into racing. I think some of the races probably need rethinking. I think that Kazoo hurdle for horses that hadn't won a Grade 1 or a Grade 2 since 2020, I thought that was an abject failure, if I'm honest. You've got a Grand National horse in Topfield Bend that won it. Yeah. Beat Tom, who's a fell chaser and a bit of a twilight horse. So for me, that did nothing. There was 4 runners in that, and it was... Dan McGrew was close up in third. So Connections of the winner got really lucky that, that was a good bit of placing. They got 26,000 quid, for galloping around Lingfield and beating 3 rivals. And one of those, the market leader, just didn't run a race for whatever reason. But, there were some positives to come out of it. And these things take time to mature and grow and organically improve. And, you're not going to hit the ground running totally first time out. So, as we've seen with things like the Racing League and the Sunday Super Series, the green shoots are there. We're just going to keep watering them. Well, perhaps not in Lingfield's case, otherwise we might be waterlogged. But we've got to try and nurture these things. They're good ideas. It was certainly workable. I think Connections appreciated it. There were some good races, some excellent finishes, and some really nice performances as well. But it's not the Dublin Racing Festival, and if that's what we're pitching it at, it's got a long way to go before we get there. But as a first step, I think it was encouraging.
Yeah, I think a really fair synopsis, as you say, the fact that it's not the Dublin Racing Festival, but it attracted, horses from Ireland. Darva Star was quite a good name to have over. And the fact that Bristol de May ran at Lingfield instead of running at Haydock was indicative of the fact that there was an attractive alternative, although some people might say, well, because there was an alternative, it weakened both fields. But that's a conversation I'm sure we'll have more of. With regards to Lingfield or racing anywhere else over the weekend, did you see anything that you felt might be a Cheltenham play, a Cheltenham winner for you?
The obvious,
Allaho, the right.
Other than the obvious, I mean, just going back to Lingfield, I thought there were some nice performances there. I thought Fantastic Ass in winning. I thought he screamed sort of a future Welsh Grand National winner. I thought Love Envoy and Nurse Susan, those are horses that perhaps could go to Cheltenham and be very competitive in the mares. So there was some nice performances there as well. I was quite impressed with Dr. Panassus, the first winner of the juvenile at Ascot over the weekend. I thought he quickened up really well. Didn't manage to win for David O'Mara, but I know he only won a small field Ascot race, but just with the spring in the offing, I'd be interested to see which way the Skeletons go with him, whether they rush up and try and get him qualified for the Fred Winter or the Boodles. It might be a bit late for that, but he'd be an interesting one perhaps going into the spring festivals because he looked to have loads of pace, and I thought he warmed up through that round of jumping as well, and by the end he was pretty proficient.
Yeah, Dan Skelton suggests that he'll probably have another run before the festivals, and which festival he goes to, we'll still wait to find out more. Okay, so that's a reflection on the majority of stuff on the weekend. Still more chat to come about that, but we like to tackle the big topics on Racing Weekly, so we're going to have a chat about a few of them. And one that we need to talk about, Sam, and I think it's quite a topical thing at the moment, it came in a Racing Post interview that Edward O'Grady gave. We know what a legend he has been for the sport, a brilliant trainer. And for someone for Edward O'Grady's standings to say that the sport is becoming antiseptic, the Cheltenham Festival, a commercial jamboree, do you feel that he has a valid point about what he's saying?
I haven't read the article. I've seen, obviously, the bits that have been picked out and the sound bites and stuff. If he means by antiseptic that, racing is being watered down a little bit, the Grand National has brought in a load of reform and new measures to try and make it a safer race. If he's meaning that, if he's meaning that, safety has been put as paramount and, perhaps we're not the same game as we were 30, 40, 50 years ago, well, I think that's essential. We have to move with the times. Mm-hmm. We're in a different world than we were 5 years ago, never mind 50. And, we can see that racing's been attacked from all four corners, really, whether it be a health and safety issue, whether it be a gambling issue, whether, we're under fire. And so we have to regulate stringently. I think the BHA are trying to do that. Hopefully bookmakers have woken up to that as well and are starting to do that and look after people's mental health, whereas, perhaps 5-10 years ago, they wouldn't have given it a second thought particularly. So, self-regulation is going to be very, very important for us going forward and always trying to evolve. So I'm not sure we are an antiseptic.
I thought the point that he made about a lot of the online activities that's going on, particularly through gambling, through betting at the moment, so much of that takes away from the racecourse experience. Of course, that has changed hugely before COVID. The fact that a lot of people were doing their betting online, but then obviously COVID came along and that increased. So it's increased more than probably we would have expected in the last 2 to 3 years. And I think his one of the key points about it being antiseptic is a lot of the action, a lot of the punters and the racegoers' action has been taken away from the racecourse. And I suppose that has some valid claims.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And it's not very often I feel sympathy for bookmakers, but I think the on-course bookmakers have been really poorly treated in the last 18 months or since COVID started. A lot of these guys have been without work. They haven't been able to get furlough payments. They've really, really struggled. And, they're now back on the racecourses, but I don't think particularly from what I gather that there's any dispensation being given to them. They're still being charged, good money to go and bet there. And it's been really difficult for them, and I've got a lot of sympathy for that. They might find, of course, if the Gambling Commission has its way or if Parliament has its way with these new affordability checks coming in, that punters are driven back to the racecourse and they are going to be betting into, racecourse pools, into on-course layers, et cetera, because it's just so much of a faff to go online. So that might be quite good for the sport and it might regenerate the on-course market. Which would be welcome in some respects as well. So I understand what Eddie O'Grady's saying there as well. There's nothing better on a racecourse than having a vibrant ring, and plenty of punters playing, fists of 50s and tenors being passed between bookmaker and punter as well. I mean, it just all adds to the spectacle of racing. So I do get what he's saying there and that it has become a little bit sanitised.
One of the subjects that we discussed before and has been discussed a number of times over the last few years is the reduction in field sizes in the sport of racing. And it now appears as well that attendances are also smaller. The RCA reported this week that average racecourse attendances have fallen for the 5th consecutive year. How worried are you by that?
I think there's a raft of things that racing could do better, and I certainly think charging an exorbitant figure, or what is perceived to be, certainly by me anyway, an exorbitant figure to get into a midweek card on the all-weather or just on your local track is I find that pretty unpalatable, to be honest. And people are voting with their feet. I do think that. I think there is something that could be said for some stricter, not legislation as such, but more stringent checking of prices as well. I think to go and order a beer on a British racecourse now it's so expensive, and the whole day really is beginning to offer poor value. Once you've paid to get in, the customer experience is really disappointing. You might have some small fields. You're then paying a fortune for your food and drink. You're paying a good sizable figure for your admission. It's a very, very expensive, pricey day. And unfortunately, if we're not giving them the quality on the track, okay, Saturday Ascot, you're happy to go and pay a good few quid. And I'm fortunate that I work within the industry and I don't have to pay admission into racecourses. But you would be happy to go Saturday to see two good quality horses in the Clarence House, a good supporting cast as well. And I can understand why you would do that. But I wasn't there at Ascot on Saturday. I bet there was decent queues for drinks. I bet the drinks were fairly expensive. I'm not just digging out Ascot. I think it's the same across a lot of racecourses. I just don't think you get great value anymore. And I don't think the food, from what I gather, and I've gone and paid for it as well, so you've got to eat, is particularly palatable in a lot of cases. I was at Warwick recently, and I think there was a lot of discourse really about what was actually on offer to 5,000 people that were there, long queues.
Quite a few disgruntled customer reviews I read.
Yeah, exactly. And it's disappointing. It's Warwick's big day. It's a track I love. I enjoy working there. But it just doesn't think, I go racing in Ireland. You're waiting probably 2 minutes for a drink, big long bars, all the Guinnesses, 3/4 pre-pulled, they top it up, bosh, you're done. I don't find that in our country. I find that if you want to go and have a drink, after a race, you then wait until after the next race before you get served a lot of the time. And unfortunately, that's just the custom experience. You can only speak as you find, and that's how I have found it. So you can understand why one or two people are being turned off by it.
So on the specifics, I can see that the actual customer experience is a bit awkward. But on the wider point, isn't it also a case of course, average racecourse attendances are going to decline because we've got too much racing. Therefore, we're at saturation. I think we've talked about it before, you and I, Sam, over the years. We're at saturation point. So if we've got too many fixtures and we only have a customer base that isn't expanding, that is pretty much where it is and has been for a while, and you're putting on more fixtures, average attendance is, by mathematics and by logic, going to fall. Is that not simply the case?
Yeah, people have only got so much money. Probably saw it in cricket as well, didn't we, last year? The shoehorning the 100 in as well. The T20 attendances, they dropped off. People can only find the money. They've got their pound, haven't they, for their leisure? Their leisure pound can only go so far, and especially if you're trying to take a family in as well. I know there are certain dispensation for under 16s and things like that, but they still want feeding, and they still want drinks, etc., etc. So it's a very, very expensive world we live in at the moment, and fuel prices going through the roof as well, and it's difficult for people to apportion the money to go racing. So we have to make it a really good experience. Now, if they're queuing for half an hour for something to eat and then paying 10, 12 quid for a burger, it's a no-brainer, isn't it? What are you going to do? You've got to really love your racing. If you're just trying to be sold to the game, you're not going to go back, are you?
It's a very fair point, Sam. I'm going to move things on, if that's okay, and talk about a man who has been in the news in racing for a long time, but rather more quiet in recent seasons. Richie, he's spoken about the fact that his particular team of horses, they're going through a transition. He obviously had Fahine, Duvin, Benny de Deer, a lot of top-class horses over the years, Andy Power, etc. But that's gone a bit quiet, although he's still in the game, and he's talked about buying more, giving them time, bumpers, hurdlers for the future. I mean, where do you stand on the sport obviously trying to retain owners like Richie, but also allowing them and their team time to develop horses?
Yeah, I think it's cyclical, isn't it? A lot of it. I mean, you can't expect to dominate a sport for infinite years, can you? You're going to have a quiet time, and you see that in football, whether it be Liverpool dominating in the 80s and then go how many years without winning a title?
Not enough, in my opinion.
She obviously been a Manchester United fan, but the same with United, dominating through the Ferguson years, and obviously you'd struggle a bit Stockport County at the moment. So it's very cyclical. You get a cream. I mean, he was obviously put an awful lot of money into the game and got some fantastic purchases that were brilliantly trained and well ridden, and obviously enjoyed a wonderful time. And I suppose you take that for granted a little bit. You just take it for granted that those horses will just be bought every year in France by Willie's very shrewd and smart team of purchasers. They will then be trained in exemplary fashion by one of the masters of the game, and it's understandable that you would expect that to happen on a regular basis. But he's got a younger crop of horses coming through. We might have to wait a year or two for them to mature. I was saying the other day, other than Chac and Passoir and one or two others, that there aren't many sort of headline Saturday horses, are there? But there are a crop of young ones coming through, and that's one thing that Willie Mullins always seems to do. He just regenerates so well. He might lose various owners and whatever. He just gets another raft of horses in and just dominates the sport continually.
And one horse he's got that's a potential Gold Cup horse, Sam, is Royal Pagaille.
It's now Sam Brown and Royal Pagaille who move on. Remastered has come under pressure. Lord de Menil's weakening away. Sam Brown on the left and Royal Pagaille on the right. They're heading on down towards the second last. Remastered driven firmly by Scudamore, trying to get on terms and beginning to plug on. Fortescue, Orange Cap is back in fourth. Here's the second last. Royal Pagaille jumps on from Sam Brown. Remastered, Fortescue, and Lord de Menil is a leaden-legged fifth. Royal Pagaille under his welter burden of 11.10. Sam Brown won't lie down, finding a bit more for Coleman's urgings. The final fence in the Peter Marsh. They're in the air together. Royal Pagaille on the far side, Sam Brown on the near side. A slow motion finish with still half a furlong to cover. Royal Pagaille, Sam Brown sticking to the task. Fortescue staying on stoutly. Royal Pagaille, Sam Brown is coming back at him. Royal Pagaille, nose down, defies top weight, and it's back-to-back wins in the Peter Marsh.
He's a very good horse. Last year in the Gold Cup, he tore off, I don't know what the technical term is, but he tore off like the front of his hoofs. He was so lame.
We haven't seen as many horses over the Irish. Is that because of the way the weather's been?
Well, well, it's a good question actually. We've struggled. I mean, a lot of our horses. I bought a lot of horses when Jigginstown left Willie's yard. A lot of horses, and they weren't very good. And we tried to support Willie. It was good. Last year, I was disappointed in some of them. We've had a lot of horses hurt. A lot of horses hurt or died, and we've reloaded. We've reloaded a lot. I've got a good bumper horse, I hope, on Thursday, and we'll see what happens.
What's his name?
His name's Mercury.
Right.
So Patrick likes him. So, oh, hello. So we'll try and do the best we can.
I thought it was a magnificent ride as much as anything else by Charlie Deutsch, who I think everyone's talking about him as being perhaps the most improved rider over the last two seasons. It's no secret. But how serious are Royal Pagaille's chances in the Gold Cup, do you think?
I don't want to knock the horse at all because I love him to bits, and he's almost metronomic round Haydock, isn't he? He just turns up there on bottomless ground and produces. Doesn't matter if he's got 11.12 or 11.10 or 10.11. He just produces. He's got great guts, great heart, and no little ability. But I think racing around Cheltenham on spring ground, he wouldn't be for me, I must admit, even at a big price. I think his stable have done exceptionally well with him. I think Charlie Deutsch has got a good synchronicity with him as well. I just love the way that he just keeps finding. He's tenacious. As I say, he just turns up to Haydock. He's become, well, he's almost the new Bristol Demai, isn't he? He's become the Haydock specialist, and all power to them for producing him like that. And good for Rich Ritchie, to have that sort of Saturday afternoon horse in this country. Probably took a little bit of a step of faith to move away from what was so successful for him. Having horses with Willie Mullins, having one or two trained in the UK as well, and it's paid off in spades.
We're going to talk about a few interesting topics in the sport, worrying, one or two of them. And the first thing, Sam, is about the gambling review. We know that a report is due. Recommendations are going to be due out in the next few weeks, we believe, which could have a significant impact for the sport, for betting, for how regular people like us might be doing our betting in the future, affordability checks, etc. How concerned are you about what the potential dangers are of that review?
Well, I'm very concerned. I mean, we touched earlier on the podcast that sort of racing's been attacked from sort of all corners, really. And, this is arguably the most dangerous, because by asking for affordability checks and having to go through the rigmarole of providing bank statements and everything, that is going to put a lot of the 10 and 20 and 50 pound punters off. And, we all know plenty of those. I'm probably still one of those. And, are you going to want to jump through hoops to then be able to just go and have a bet on a Saturday afternoon. We talked about the leisure pound earlier on, and people will find different things to spend their money on, unfortunately, which then obviously affects the levy, which then obviously affects the prize money and affects field sizes, the horses in training, people's livelihoods. I mean, it could have an absolutely crushing effect on the way that the sport operates going forward. For me, I mean, they're draconian measures. I know there's been one or two very sensational programs that have been on recently linking, gambling addiction to suicide rates amongst young males, and I get all that. Thankfully, I've never had an issue with betting on horses. I've always been able to self-regulate, and I learnt my lesson at an early age that, you've got to be very careful what you bet on, and you want to bet on things that aren't loaded against you. And with racing, there's a certain amount of skill, hopefully, and technique and experience that helps you win. So, I can understand why people are very concerned about gambling and the way that it can wreck lives. I totally get that. You can lose an awful lot of money in a short space of time, certainly in those machines that were the FOBTs that were in operation in most bookmakers on the high street. But I do think we've got to be really careful that we don't just link. It's a very lazy link as well. Some very high profile cases from people who've got into trouble with addiction on gambling and then have done something dreadful. I think, we have to see this more in the round. I think it's a really important subject going forward that we actually get this right. And my main worry, I think, is the fact that, the Prime Minister who's drowning at the moment is going to just jump on any lifeboat that gets offered to him. And this could be seen as a way of scoring points. And if that is the case, then that is seriously very damaging towards racing.
I agree that there's a great deal of uncertainty at the moment, and hopefully things will become clearer so we know exactly what those dangers are going to be over the next few weeks. A couple of news lines coming through in the last week or so. We've heard about Robbie Dunn. He and his team are going to appeal against the 18-month ban that he received for bullying and harassment of Bryony Frost. More on that, obviously, in the coming weeks when we know the grounds for appeal. The Gold Cup, which had been, up until today, without a sponsor at the Cheltenham Festival, has indeed finally got one. Boodles stepping in, Sam, and that is good news because it's quite a significant concern that we've got this far or this close to the festival without having the flagship race being sponsored.
Yeah, it's great news. Obviously Cheltenham and the Jockey Club are quite insistent that they didn't want a bookmaker sponsoring, so that sort of narrows down which high worth companies you're going to go to, and they're going to, obviously take on the sponsorship. But Boodles, a quality jeweler, that's a nice name to be associated with a quality race such as the Gold Cup. So that fits well. Fingers crossed they're in the sponsorship, lasts for a good few years and they're in for the long term and not short term, because there seems to be a fair bit of chopping and changing at the moment with the sponsorship of the Blue Ribbon event at the Cheltenham Festival. But yeah, good news. That takes a bit of pressure off Cheltenham. Obviously, a bit of kudos to racing as well, going forward, that its flagship event, really, of the National Hunt season has got a good sponsor.
One positive bit of news as well, in addition to that, Sam, as we all know, sports documentaries, all the rage. We've seen All or Nothing on Amazon, Drive to Survive on Netflix, doing wonders for the particular sports that have launched those. And it looks as if racing potentially could be next, with a tie-up between Netflix and the sport. There's chat about a couple of yards in Europe having some filming done already, might be heading in the right direction. It could potentially be massive for racing to have this promotional facility.
Brilliant platform, isn't it? I mean, if we can pull that off, that'd be superb. I think there's a Joseph O'Brien. I think there's probably been some filming done there as well in the recent weeks. So if we can get a little bit of UK interest as well, which I'm sure we will, I think it's a brilliant platform to help promote the sport again. And even if you weren't, I wouldn't say I'm a great Formula One fan, but I really enjoyed that documentary. And any of them are really worth watching. I'm not even a great sort of basketball fan, but the Michael Jordan led documentary was absolutely engrossing watching, wasn't it? It was fabulous to get the heads up on that and learn about all the history of that team, the Bulls, and that sort of spell of success that they enjoyed. So I think all those sort of things, if we could, racing really does lend itself as well to this, because it's such an emotive sport. Passions run high, as we saw at Ascot on Saturday, and it's absolutely perfect platform. Netflix do these really well, and I'm sure there's some very good production companies involved in it.
It's all about the product on the racecourse. You're right, Sam. It's all about getting it right on the racecourse, because then we've got a good product to sell, and we've got a pretty decent looking weekend ahead of us. We've got Cheltenham's Trials Day on Saturday coming up, and in the Cotswold Chase, there's the potentially exciting prospect of seeing Ahoy Senior lining up against more experienced rivals, a horse who clearly is still held in very high regard despite his defeat by Brave Man's Game at Kempton. What are your thoughts on his potential appearance in the Cotswold Chase, and do you still believe he's got all the tools to be a superstar of the future?
Yeah, I do. I don't think one blip should define his career by any stretch of the imagination. Obviously, the Newbury performance was utterly dominant. It's just going to be fascinating to see. It's great to see him being aggressively campaigned, really. All kudos to Lucinda Russell, Peter Scudamore and connections, really. They believe that he's good enough to perhaps take his place in a Gold Cup, whether it's this year or next. And they're looking to vindicate that faith and pitch him in here. Now, you can say that with the likes of Chantry House, Santini, one or two others, their horses a little bit on recovery mission, and Ahoy Senior, like Cool Cody, who's also in the race, are very much on the up and thrusting forward. So they haven't quite reached their ceiling of improvement and progression yet, whereas perhaps one or two of the others have plateaued off. So it makes sense. Gives him a look at Cheltenham as well, which I think is always a good move. And why not have a go? I mean, it's an 8-runner race with a couple of horses that are fairly have got their sort of futures and reputations to redeem. So I think it's worth a punt. Yeah,
I agree. I think there are some horses that are truly well exposed in that race, certainly amongst the entries, and we might get a 4 or 5 runner race. It'll give him a sighter over fences at Cheltenham. I think it'd be a great shout to line him up in that. I hope that he does run, because going back to what I was saying earlier on in this podcast, that fine line about seeing something that's exciting now being exposed as not quite good enough, or what we hoped he or she would be, and they are good enough, keeps us excited by it. Was there anything else on Trials Day at Cheltenham that you might be interested, maybe in the Cleve or a couple of the novice races, juvenile races?
Yeah, I think the juvenile hurdle's interesting, because I think Isio puts his credentials on the line to become a Triumph Hurdle winner. Obviously very impressive at Kempton. Absolutely bolted up that day. Did a fair bit wrong as well. He was a good purchase from France, won at Dieppe, and then obviously came out of Kempton and routed a field there. Now the form's taken a couple of hits, but he's finished in a different postcode to those behind him. Be really fascinating to see whether he operates around Cheltenham okay, and I think he becomes a live sort of Triumph Hurdle contender if he runs a big race Saturday. And I don't think, with the exception of Dan Skelton's Warwick winner, we've got a lot of strength in depth, really. I mean, I know Milton Harris might argue that, and the one or two on the peripheries, but we could do with something in the next couple of weeks to really come out and scream, Triumph Hurdle potential star. And I think Isio is potentially one of those horses. I think there's obviously the Spring Juvenile and the Dublin Racing Festival in a week or two's time as well, which usually throws up a major contender. But it just seems quite sort of flatlining market at the moment, with Phil Dorr operating at the head of it. So it'll be fascinating to see whether Isio can stake his claims on Saturday. He's a very, very talented and exciting horse, I think. Yeah.
Champ in the Cleve?
Champs in the Cleve, yeah. Cool Cody also in there. Don Levant, McFabulous. I think the Nicholls team will be keen on his chances. We'll hear more about that. And obviously Paisley Park, the old campaigner, the war horse, has to go and do it again.
What about the Sky Bet Chase at Doncaster? Now, obviously, there are a lot of uncertainties about who's going to line up for that. I know a couple of horses who are actually in the Cotswold are potentially lining up in that race as well. So that's why I was thinking maybe the Cotswold could potentially cut up. So any thoughts on the Sky Bet at this stage?
Yeah, it looks a tough race for me. And yet every year I look at it, I think it's a tough race. I think there's only been one favourite win in the last 10 years, and that was 4-1 joint, and 25-1 winners and 12-1s and all sorts. So it's not an easy race to evaluate. Looks like being a dry week in Doncaster leading up to the race, and it's good ground already. So that's going to suit, horses perhaps with a little bit more toe and less of the horses that we've seen win this in recent years. That, obviously a Scottish national winner won it last year, where the emphasis was very much on stamina. Just a quick perusal of the runners. I thought the good ground might help Fuzil Raffles if he runs. Just thought he got stuck in the mud a little bit at Cheltenham last time behind Cool Cody. I thought he put up a good performance, but he just hasn't got the scope of one or two of his rivals in the handicap chasing game. And I think Doncaster flat track on better ground and just give him a bit of spring, and he might be more of a adversary for his rivals at Doncaster on Saturday. I just think it'll help his technique a little bit better, and he can just pull himself and bounce off that ground a bit better.
Now, we were just talking earlier on about interesting entries, and I was saying about Ahoy Signor lining up potentially in the Cotswold Chase. Well, in Ireland on Thursday at Gorham Park, we've got the Grade 2 John Mulhern Galmoy Hurdle, and Classical Dream, fine, see him entered in that. It could be a nice step en route to the festival for Classical Dream. But also in there is Album Photo, a dual Gold Cup winner, and obviously back with a win in his race at the start of the season, or relative start of the season for him. I'm not sure if we'll see him or not, but I thought it was interesting that Willie Mullins is keeping his options open with him. Any thoughts on what's coming up there?
Yeah, I think he's an intriguing entry, isn't he? Just reading the quotes after Album Photo won his traditional Tremor comeback, Willie Mullins was suggesting that he's an easier horse to train this year and just in recent times, and he was keen to get another run into him. He didn't want him to be too ring rusty, and maybe that's a throwback to last year's Gold Cup, and they just felt that he was a little bit undercooked. So I think it's intriguing that he's in this race. I mean, obviously Presenting Percy used it as a stepping stone a couple of years. Classical Dream, obviously, stablemates in there with a very strong hand, courtesy of that Leopardstown comeback. He must be becoming a little bit easier to train as he gets older as well. Perhaps we should start doing laps of the local park now and get on to whatever Willie Mullins is feeding his horses. And we might start running marathons.
I'm becoming harder to train. I'm carrying so many injuries at the moment, Sam, that I'm going to be retired very soon. I don't think I'll ever come back from my potential injuries.
Injuries and extra pounds in my case. But but Classical Dream obviously can do it either way. I mean, the way that he swung off the bridle to win at Punchestown when landing that gamble back in the spring, and then obviously making all at Leopardstown. So, yeah, he's a fascinating contender for the stayers, isn't he?
The Thyestes Chase is also taking place on Thursday at Goran. Longhouse Poet is a horse near the top of the market for that. I'm not certain about this horse. Obviously, the fact that he had a long layoff, came back, has had just the one run in the last year. There are a few alternatives. There's Ascaria 10 on the ropes is in there. Brayside of Gordon Elliott's I thought might be an interesting horse for the race. Chris's Dream, top weight. How do you see this one?
Probably not as well as you. I think you spent more time on the Thyestes than I have. I was poring over the Sky Bet thinking we were going to do a bit on that. So I'll leave you to work that one out. That looks a bit too tough for me.
Oh, I'm not going to go anywhere near it.
The Daily Mail, we don't have to tip in Ireland.
I was just throwing the names at you to see which one you might bite with.
Obviously, Ascaria 10 comes out of that race that the Cheltenham Festival, the National Chase, that's working out so well. So I'd have to have a good look and revisit the race, but yeah, it wouldn't be one for me at the moment.
Everything that I looked at, I kept thinking there's a reason why not to back it. I mean, Chris's Dream's got so much weight. Obviously gone up in the handicap after a good season last season, yeah. I thought if I had to choose one now, and I don't, but I might go with Brayside, but I'll have to wait for the moment. Yeah. Okay, Sam, we're moving into that familiar territory where we use your skills as one of the best tipsters out there. What is it? 5-time tipster of the year. So each week we're going to ask you for Turner's tip. So what are you going to give us, Sam?
I'm going to go for Isio to win the juvenile trial at Cheltenham on Trials Day. I was really, really impressed with him at Kempton. The speed figure that he recorded there was certainly on a par with what you need to win a Triumph Hurdle. So if he can prove that he can go uphill and down dale at Cheltenham, I think he's going to emerge out the pack and be one of our main contenders.
Okay, Isio on trials day at Cheltenham for Sam Turner. That is this week's Turner's Tip. Now, every week on Racing Weekly, we're going to be joined by a guest from the world of racing. And this week, we are very privileged to have Harry Derham, assistant trainer to Paul Nicholls. But he's much more than that. Just for those of you who aren't familiar with Harry, he's been part of the Nicholls team, gosh, for an eternity. He's been right-hand man to Paul Nicholls for, I think, about 6 years now. He retired from race riding in 2014 at the age of just 19. He rode 50 winners, including a festival winner on Salubrious in the Martin Pipe Conditional Jockeys Hurdle at the festival in 2013. Harry, you've been involved with the Paul Nicholls team, obviously back from the Corto Star Denman days. I mean, there are shots of you running down the course with Corto Star, etc. I mean, it's in your blood, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I think you've sort of bigged me up slightly too much there.
He's also very modest, ladies and gentlemen.
The Corto Star and Denman days, I was just a young boy getting in the way watching, really. And I always sort of said that Paul, Corto and Ruby winning all those races is probably as big a reason as why I'm in racing as any. Because watching it was easy game back then. You just sort of went racing with your mum and dad. Paul and Ruby would win a grade 1 or have a treble on a Saturday and then you go home. So I thought, well, seems like a bit of me. So, that's probably why I'm in the sport, really.
Yeah, it's probably pretty intoxicating, wasn't it, Harry, seeing all that success? And do you think it was a case of being spoilt at an early age?
Undoubtedly so. Because as I said, literally those horses, Big Bucks and Mastermindeds and Denmans, and they just used to turn up and they'd win. And even if those weren't running, then Neptune Collonge or Twist Magic was running. And, those days would I just used to go racing every weekend. And I genuinely don't remember a time when Paul didn't have big winners. It was just ridiculous. And, that's why I've got into it. And to be fair, he's had amazing success since. And fortunately, I've been a part of it for, him having loads of really, really great winners.
Well, actually, Harry, we know quite a bit about it because one of the things that you do, seemingly voluntarily, is a blog, which keeps us all up to date with what goes on in Ditchit. And it's quite interesting reading that blog, some of the insights. And in particular, you've spoken about the teamwork, getting to 100 winners for the season for Paul. But I think something that's far more significant for everybody to understand the sport of horse racing are the bad times as well as the good. And the yard suffered a pretty horrific time this weekend with the loss of Master Tommytucker. And you have documented really beautifully the emotions that so many people have gone through. First of all, how is Scott? How are the owners? How are everyone associated with dear old Master Tommytucker?
Scott is absolutely gutted. Tony and Louise are too, obviously. But I think that probably spreads to Clifford, who is obviously the head man at Top Yard where Tommy lived. Paul was upset yesterday. I think about a horse like him with jump racing, we're lucky enough to deal with these horses for maybe 5, 6, 7 years. And in our yard, we're not that used to having that many homebreds. Tony Fair and Louise Cabell brought Tommy into the world, and Louise put a lovely post on Facebook about how she had to hand feed him for the first few weeks because he was, he was a bit of a problem when he was first coming into the world. And I think from the start of Tommy's life, it's never been straightforward. I think he's always been a rascal. I think he's always been a bit too cocky for his own good. I think he's always been a bit bold and a bit bolshy. And Louise and Tony won't mind me saying that for the first few years they had him and the first few months that we had him, he was a right handful and a bit of a pain in the backside at first. But, when you have a horse like him who's with you for a number of years, you grow a huge affection to them. And, we've got a big team, and there's a lot of people that are very involved in a horse like his career, because, from physio and the farrier and vets, there's so many people that go into it. I mean, Scott Marshall, who looks after him and rides him, looks after some of the best horses in our yard, and he rides Clander's Oboe and Brave Man's Game. And for him, I always think it's hardest for the member of staff that looks after that horse, because he would have come in this morning. Tommy lived next to Clander's Oboe, so he'd have come in this morning, mucked out Clan, and seen an empty stable next door. And that is, however many times you do it, however much you talk about it or think about it, that is brutally tough. And yeah, it was a really, really horrible day. I mean, normally Tommy's at the front of the race, and Harry and Paul had sort of hatched a plan that, they read like there was going to be a lot of pace on grueling ground. And we just said, why don't we just try something completely different and just see whether we can just hunt into it. And I actually thought Harry was in the process of giving him an absolute beast of a ride, because they'd gone very hard. And he just crept into it. And, the lovely thing about Tommy is you knew that from the third last of the line, he would have given you absolutely everything he had. And he obviously just got in a bit tight. As Harry said, he's made a lot of jumping mistakes in his life. That wasn't really one. He just got in a bit tight and didn't quite get his landing gear out. And obviously, he rolled over, and as he got back up, you very quickly realised that it wasn't good. And that was absolutely horrific. One thing I will say is that, obviously, a lot's made in our sport of horse welfare and things like that. And Harry was incredibly sore after that fall. He got kicked in his knee. He's got a fair limp this morning. He didn't look in great shape, even though he's fine. And he was in a lot of pain when I got to him. But his first reaction was to get up off the ground, run over to Tommy, stop him, and hold him until the vets got to him. I just thought that was a real mark of the man, that, he'd had some amazing days with Tommy, some very stressful days with Tommy as well. But, he was absolutely gutted when I got to him, and we all will, and we will miss him a lot, because he was a fabulous horse. And he's very special to a lot of people.
Harry, if it's not an unfair question, because I imagine that people have thought about it, but it's not the first time it's happened, and you pointed out in your blog it won't be the last time it happens. So how do you deal with it on a personal level?
For an hour or so, you don't really. I think sadly, as assistant, you have to deal with those things a lot, and I try to, most of the guys that work in the stable, I try to shield them from it, because it's a completely miserable experience. Now, obviously, I wasn't going to shield Scott from it. He's a very knowledgeable horseman, and he's worked in racing a long time, and he obviously wanted to come down and see him. At first, it's very raw. It's you're very emotional, and it's Rishi is completely horrible. We all walked back down the track yesterday together, me, Cobby, and Scott, because I think all of us thought the same. We just wanted to have a walk and just take a minute and get ourselves together. And in the end, the way I deal with it and the way I get by it, because I don't think you just get over it immediately, is that you say, well, this is a horse that was doing a job that he quite clearly loved, because otherwise he wouldn't have given it so much. He was incredibly well looked after every day of his life. We did everything we could for him in terms of his welfare and his care whilst he was in our care. And thanks to Clive Hamlin and his excellent team at the racecourse, he would not have suffered for long. Now, that doesn't make it better or nicer or easier to deal with, but I think if you can say, did we give this horse the best possible care and attention and level of welfare when he was alive? Yes. And Also, I don't laugh, but I always smile to myself when I read on social media or in the press or whatever it is, when people say we're forcing these horses to do this. In my time working with horses, a few times I've tried to force a horse to do something he doesn't want to do. I can assure you, you can't do it, because as Jamie Moore, I thought he was very good being interviewed yesterday. He said, it's man versus beast. If a horse doesn't want to do something, an 11 stone me isn't going to make him do it. These horses want to race. They are bred to race. And you could see a horse like Master Tommytucker every day at home. He's tearing Scott's arms out. He's leading down the gallops. He's in a right strop if he's not leading. And to me, if you're, it doesn't make it easier, but they are bred to do it, and every now and again it does happen. So you just have to get by saying, whilst he was in our care, we did everything for him we possibly could have. And remember the times when he was, when he was at his best.
Well, Harry, thank you for being so candid about it, and we certainly appreciate the honesty of emotion that you've shown and that you wrote about. And if it's okay, we're going to just move on to something slightly more positive for the team, and that was Paul bringing up a century of winners, courtesy of a brilliant ride from Mr. Maxwell on Cat Tiger. I thought was one of the best things of the weekend.
Yeah, it was. When they flashed past the line, I was so tense, because he got beat very, very narrowly at Doncaster a few weeks before, and he was really cross at himself because he essentially got racing too early. And so going up towards halfway up the running, I thought he's got it. And then John Joe just got one last bit more out of his horse. And on the line, my initial thought was, God, he's beaten. But so Paul was on the phone. What do you think? Because he was at Taunton. I said, I didn't really know. Anyway, so a couple of minutes went by and they announced it with verse number 1, and I just shouted yes and then put the phone down. So I just assumed that he got the message, but I was delighted. I mean, David is a really, really good man. He's a big supporter of ours. He's a lot of fun. Very, very knowledgeable about the game. And it was fantastic. I mean, he loved it. He came in and he said, God, well, even if I'd have been second, I'd have been delighted. I had such a good ride off the horse. But it was great for him to ride that winner, and he'll have that one over Cobden now for the year, because I think he went into the weighing room and said, all you needed was me to ride your 100th winner. So that was fun.
Sam, I just jumping in on what Harry's saying about David there. I love that attitude, the fact that David, irrespective of what everybody else says, and there are people who are pro David Maxwell, people who don't appreciate what he's doing in the saddle. Irrespective of that, he's really pleased with what he's doing, which is, a really good thing, a good way to be, isn't it?
I think he's magnificent for the game, Rich. I mean, he puts a lot of money into it for a start.
It's great that racing offers the opportunity where you can go and ride as an amateur against professionals. He has improved immeasurably for me. I think he's worked very hard at his fitness, his tactical side of his riding, his technical side of his riding. I think he brings a freshness. I think his post-race interviews are often hilarious and very engaging. I don't see any negative. And people who complain about his riding, if he gets beaten a short head, well, his name is next to that horse before the race starts. You know what you're going to get if you're backing the David Maxwell horse. You're going to get an amateur-ridden horse that perhaps hasn't got the most natural ability in the world, but he's maximising what he has got. And I think he has improved probably a stone in the last 2 or 3 years in the saddle. I think he's keen to learn. Obviously, his fitness is exemplary. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to compete with these guys. And you know what you're going to get back in one of his horses. More often than not, you're going to get a horse that he's going to do his utmost to try and win the race on. And as a punter, that's a positive. So, yeah, he might not be within a certain amount of pounds and ounces of the top riders that are riding, but God, he's given it a good go. And I really do think that there's room in racing for characters like David. I think it's refreshing to hear him speak after races the joy that he gets from it is really contagious. And long may he continue.
I agree. Harry, we've just been through a couple of horses and good performances from the weekend, apart from David and Cat Tiger. But you touched on it. Paul was at Taunton to watch Yala Enki win the Portman Cup for the third year in a row. A remarkable 12-year-old.
Yeah, he is a remarkable horse. That's a really good word, actually, because his enthusiasm is that of a 5 or 6-year-old horse, really. He's obviously just got an amazing. He's obviously got an amazing will to win. He's obviously incredibly tough, incredibly robust. I would imagine he must be very, very mentally strong, because he's been to a lot of, hard races in his life. He rarely wins, on the bridle. He's got to dig in at some stage in the race. And him and B get on fantastically well, don't they? She sort of lets him get on with it. She's nice and positive on him, sets the tone on him, and he just stays really, really well. We didn't run him in the Welsh National this year because we felt that the Portman Cup was his race, because the conditions of the race set up well for him. So I mean, really, we were pretty confident. He'd had an amazing preparation for it. He was absolutely ready for his life. He looked magnificent, and to be fair to him, he looks an absolute picture of health still. I mean, he doesn't look like a 12-year-old. He doesn't look like an old horse. He certainly doesn't behave like one. He's an absolute thug. But it also, just say quickly, when we talked about Yala, I'm really pleased for his owners, Clive and Joan Hitchens. They are big supporters of National Hunt World. They're really, really wonderful people. They love their horses. All their retired horses that retire with them, they give them a home for life. Really proper National Hunt owners, and they've been fantastic supporters of us.
Some other great supporters of the sport, and currently of the Nicholls team, is the McNeil family, and one horse in particular from in their colours, 3 under through 5, continues to progress, won nicely at Warwick. What next for this exciting young horse?
I think he will either go straight to the festival or go to the Reynolds Down. I don't know what. I don't know exactly what he'll do, but it'll be one of those two options. I mean, he is, as you say, he's been great. He's winner of 9 races now. Tough, genuine, hardy, plenty of class. He's taken defence and well. He's just an uncomplicated horse. Adrian actually said at Warwick he felt better than he has all season, which is pretty exciting. What I love about him is that, there's loads and loads of horses you talk about a lot, you have to worry about lots. You don't have to worry about him. Michelle rides him every day. He just does his work, takes plenty of it, has an amazing attitude, just gets on with it and just wins races.
Harry, can I ask you about one horse that you mentioned in relation to Paul's brilliance as a trainer, and that's Cap du Matin. Clearly he's had his issues, but could you just flesh out a little bit of why you were quick to attribute Paul's brilliance to this horse making that comeback and winning?
I think more than anything, his patience. That's taken nearly 2 years to get right, and he's listened to the advice of the vets, and obviously him and Clifford have spoken a lot about Cap, and obviously the Stewart family have been very patient too. But Paul, I think what makes him so good is that there's so many times I could tell you about that horses, it's not quite going right, and I think other people would go, okay, right, well, we're not doing the right thing here, let's pull stumps. And Paul believes that it's going to happen, and he believes that he can get horses right. And I think what he does is he generates that down through his team. So then, Natalie, who rides him, and Michelle, who rides when Natalie can't, they start believing too. And if you get into that positive frame of mind, and if you can get everyone to start believing it and start thinking this is going to happen, and we're going to give this horse the amount of time he needs, and we're going to do the right things, and it's going to take a long time. I mean, Cap, I think before that run, he had 1 schooling session and he would have galloped fast once. So, you know, he'd have done loads of 3 canters. He'd have done a few 4 canters. It just I think Paul's willingness to try different things. He's not saying, okay, well, we've done this over and over again. That works, right? Well, what can we try differently that will make it work with Cap? You know, okay, if we need to take him to the water treadmill twice a week, then let's do that. If we need to do 4 canters with him and have him out 20 minutes early before everything else, let's do that. And you know, if he'd run nicely and finished 5th, you'd have been delighted. He'd have blown up and everyone would have gone, lovely run first time out, off that much of a break. But Paul could just get them to that level of fitness, which is extraordinary. And he went round there on quite slow ground. Harry got off and he said, I literally couldn't hold him for 2 miles, and he just kept galloping. But you know, that's probably a lot to do with the horse's ability as well, I know. But I just think there's so many times that Paul's brought horses back from injuries that you think you have no chance now, and he just does.
Well, we know as well, thanks to your blog, that Paul's been spending a bit of time in Barbados. Is he the only one at the yard that gets the mid-season break to Barbados? Do you ever get a little taste of the winter sunshine in the Caribbean?
No, Rich, we all go. All of us, yeah. We just leave the horses away for 2 weeks and we just all toddle up. It's fantastic, actually, yeah.
Well, I thought you might get a little break, considering that there's cricket going on out there, and I know you love your cricket, and obviously England beating up on the West Indies. And tell me a bit about your plans to take up training. Obviously, plans are now in motion. So where are we in the scheme of things?
We are now just under 13 weeks from when I leave Bulls, and then I'm not having a year off, but I'm having a year of preparation, if you like. I have my trainers modules to do. I've got quite a few things to do next winter, and then from May 2023, I'll be hopefully fully licensed and ready to go. That's the plan.
Well, what would be the one thing that you would take from Paul and from the way he does things? The one thing above everything else, and I'm sure there's loads, but what do you think is the most important element that has made him a success that you'd want to replicate?
To have a 2-week winter break.
Winter break in the Caribbean, yes.
I wouldn't mind a few of his horses. The one thing, what would I take above everything else? Do you know, I'd probably take his work rate. He's fantastic with the horses. He's an amazing trainer, but he's 12 times champion trainer. He's won, like, there's not a race he hasn't won. And he is in the yard at 6:30 every morning, making sure that we were better than we were yesterday. And I think for a man who's been doing it as long as he has, to the level he has, train the winners that he has, to still be that, like, and I mean like keen, like absolutely revved on a Monday morning keen. And I think if you could have that work rate, then, you know, it'd take you a long way.
Work rate and desire. And as you say, what you're saying, you know, be better the next day. And clearly you are always looking ahead, looking for the next opportunities at that team. So with that in mind, is there anything this week, looking ahead to the trials at the weekend at Cheltenham? I think ICO's entered on Saturday. Is there anything else perhaps that you could tell us about from the Nicholls team?
Yeah, ICO's, you're right, he's entered in the Triumph trial. He's exciting, won very well at Kempton. My grey-haired friend on this podcast tells me he did a good time, so that's exciting.
How rude.
You know, he obviously looks a really smart horse. He'll obviously have a bit more competition to take on at Cheltenham, and it's a very different track to Kempton, obviously, so that's a different challenge for him. Horse that I really like, and I hope is still progressing, is Cap Course, who could well run in the Sky Bet. He won the Sir Peter O'Sullivan Memorial at Newbury on Ladbroke Trophy Day. He won that very nicely off the back of a long layoff. He's always threatened to be quite a good horse, but it just hasn't gone right for him. He's had little niggles and just kept him off the track. And Mr. McManus has been very, very patient with him, which he probably needed, because he's a big horse, beautiful horse. So I hope if he does run, he can show something like his best again.
Okay, 2 names to look out for, ICO and Cat Course this coming week. Harry, one thing we like to do, or we want to make a regular feature here, is we like to ask all our guests 3 very simple questions. It's the same 3 questions every week, no matter who you are, when you come on the show. So are you ready?
Ready as I'll ever be.
Okay, here we go. Question 1. What was the best performance of last weekend?
Shishkin.
Shishkin.
Well, can I say Shishkin and Energemene? Because I thought the 2 of them were fabulous.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think a lot of people would agree with you as well. What will be the best performance of the weekend ahead?
ICO winning the Triumph Trial.
Again, we'll give you that. Last thing, Harry. If you could change anything in racing, and we mean absolutely anything, what would it be?
It would be that all the organisations that are in charge or in a management role came together for the good of it, as opposed to, I feel like a lot of people are rowing their own boat, which I obviously understand and I get, but I feel that if we've got such an amazing product as Energemene and Shishkin show on Saturday, if we could all come together and work together slightly more and be positive, and I think it could be even better than it is now.
Yeah. Harry, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, as I said, for being so candid, honest and open about all the pain and emotion that everyone suffered with regard to Master Tommytucker. Thank you for all the pointers ahead. Thank you for answering all our questions. Best of luck this week, and best of luck on a personal level to you and your future as a trainer. So thank you once again to Harry Derham. That's it for this week's edition of Racing Weekly, brought to you by oddschecker. My thanks to Harry Derham and to Sam Turner. Please tune in next week when we'll be joined by another guest from the world of racing, and looking ahead, of course, to the Dublin Racing Festival. Don't forget that we are here every Monday on the lead up to Cheltenham. If you like what you've heard or watched, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or in the comments section on YouTube. It would certainly mean a lot to us. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.